Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the B segment of episode 1 of Codename Kids Next Door, Kenny and the Chimp. We begin this segment with a boy named Kenny and his pet chimp named Chimpy arriving at the secret lab of Professor XXXL. The professor notably has a crab claw in place of one of his arms, and he says that this is the result of an experiment he performed in the hopes of destroying the PTA, and that's actually why he's called the duo over. He wants the two to watch over his lab while he's off trying to destroy the PTA. Or rather, I should clarify, Professor XXXL wants Chimpy to watch over his lab. He doesn't trust Kenny for whatever reason, but he felt that he had to call Kenny over as well as Chimpy. And for some reason, the professor mistakenly believes Kenny and Chimpy to be twin brothers. As far as the more specific details of what Professor XXXL wants Kenny and Chimpy to do while they're at the lab, he wants them to look over the inventory of the deadly diseases that he's collected for reasons even he admits he doesn't really know why. But in any case, he wants Chimpy to handle the containers of the deadly diseases, and he wants Kenny to just check them off with the checklist. Yeah, he just wants Kenny to check off the diseases that they find on the checklist, while he wants Chimpy to actually handle the containers. He also mentions that if for whatever reason one of the containers breaks, if one of the containers were to break, and if either of them were to be exposed to one of these deadly diseases, they can go into his office, and there's a phone that can connect them to the Horrible Disease Help Me hotline. So the phone in his office will connect to that particular hotline so that they can receive instructions on what to do to cure these diseases. So after explaining everything, Professor XXXL leaves, and Kenny tries to convince Chimpy not to cause any. Kenny tries to tell Chimpy not to be reckless with the containers, but Chimpy does end up being a bit reckless, and Kenny ends up being hit with swine flu, although this swine flu is different from the swine flu in real life. In this segment, swine flu turns Kenny's head into the head of a pig, or a pig, yeah. For some reason, Kenny's head turns into a pig when exposed to this swine flu. And when he does try to call the hotline, he ends up reaching the phone number of an ice cream cake. He ends up making an order for an ice cream cake first, but by a happy accident before actually reaching the hotline. But the person on the other line doesn't seem to know how to cure the swine flu, but that ends up not being too much of an issue because the office has a box on the wall for curing swine flu. And what's in the box? A chef that shows the pig bacon, and the pig runs off, and then Kenny's actual head returns. So Kenny tries to tell Chimpy to be careful yet again, but Kenny is again exposed to another disease, this time Salmonella Fitzgerald disease, which seems to be a reference to a scenery Yeah, it's a reference to this disease is a reference to a singer. And once again, Kenny calls the hotline, and the person on the other line actually does know how to cure this disease. According to the person on the other side of the line, Kenny is supposed to lick a chimp, and Chimpy is a chimp, so Kenny tries to lick Chimpy. But then, while Chimpy is running away and Kenny's trying to chase after him, Kenny gets exposed to another disease. And it's at this point when Professor Triple Extra Large appears, and apparently his plan to destroy the PTA has failed, and the PTA has taken his crab claw as well. But seeing the mess within the lab, Professor Triple Extra Large blames Kenny for the mess and chases after him while Kenny is chasing after Chimpy. So we go through a couple of scenes of Kenny being exposed to other diseases until finally there's no more diseases, but yeah, Kenny's no longer affected by any diseases. But then a delivery person arrives for the ice cream cake that Kenny ordered earlier in the segment. And Professor Triple Extra Large actually decides to call a truce with Kenny and says that, yeah, him, Kenny, and Chimpy should all try to get the ice cream cake. So the segment ends with Kenny, Chimpy, and Professor Triple Extra Large chasing the delivery person to get the ice cream cake. So I'm sure as the recap indicates, you'll notice that this segment barely has anything to do with Codename Kids Next Door. The only element of the segment that has some connection to Codename Kids Next Door is Professor Triple Extra Large, a character who goes on to be a member of the Rogues Gallery for the Kids Next Door. So, what exactly is Kenny and the Chimp, for those unfamiliar? Well, Kenny and the Chimp was actually was the series that Tom Warburton, the creator of Codename Kids Next Door, was actually, Tom Warburton was originally developing Kenny and the Chimp before Codename Kids Next Door became a thing. And at least this segment in particular was the pilot for Kenny and the Chimp. And it actually did air a few years before Codename Kids Next Door became a possibility or became a reality. So, but for whatever reason, Cartoon Network didn't greenlight Kenny and the Chimp. But Tom Warburton did have a few ideas in mind for what Kenny and the Chimp would have been like. And one of those ideas actually was a group of 5 recurring characters. And yes, these 5 recurring characters are the characters that ended up becoming the Sector V members of Codename Kids Next Door. And yeah, they were going to be recurring characters in Kenny and the Chimp. And maybe Professor Triple Extra Large would have been a recurring character as well, since he was in the pilot for Kenny and the Chimp at least. But as for the Kids Next Door, the title comes from the fact that they lived next door to Kenny. Or actually, they operated in a house next to Kenny's. They never really clarified if any of the Kids Next Door members lived in the house, in the Kenny and the Chimp version anyway. Or, because, yeah, and the thing about the Kids Next Door as they would have appeared in Kenny and the Chimp is they would have kept changing their moniker. Like, they would try to find a new invention or a new device in their various appearances, and they would have adapted a new moniker to reflect this invention or device that they would have in their whatever appearance that they appeared in. And they were apparently very distrustful of anyone that they considered an outsider, except for Chimpy. They seemed to be okay with Chimpy, but they didn't seem to like Kenny very much based on what little information about them was revealed in because Tom Warburton did share a little information about how the kids next door would have been portrayed in Kenny and the Chimp, and their portrayal does seem to be quite different, but yeah, they do seem to be they did seem to be a little more mischievous, or they do seem to be more troublemakers in Kenny and the Chimp, and I guess there's still some shades of that in the earlier season 1 episodes, but as the series progresses, the kids next door are portrayed in a much more heroic light. So, yeah, once again, it's pretty interesting to hear how things have changed compared to the initial idea, because originally the kids next door were just going to be recurring characters in a different show, Kenny and the Chimp, but now the kids next door have become the main characters. And yeah, I believe in Kenny and the Chimp, only the 5 members who became the Sector V members were the only members of the kids next door, whereas as the Codename Kids Next Door series progressed, the Kids Next Door expanded to being a global organization, not just the 5 members that we mostly follow the series through. So overall, yeah, that explains why Kenny and the Chimp is part of episode 1 of Codename Kids Next Door, because the other 2 segments had a shorter running time compared to the usual running time for the segments on Codename Kids Next Door. So Kenny and the Chimp was added into the first episode to fill in the runtime. And I guess the fact that Professor XXXL appears is why they would treat it as a Codename Kids Next Door segment, even if it's very loosely connected. But otherwise, yeah, there we go. So Kenny and the Chimps segment provides us with a look on how things could have turned out if things didn't end up the way they ended up happening now, with the kids next door being the stars of their own TV series rather than being recurring characters on a different show. And yeah, the kids next door themselves don't actually appear in this segment. Like I said, Professor XXXL is the only character from the rest of Codename Kids Next Door that appears specifically in this segment, the pilot of Kenny and the Chimp. But once again, this is kind of like an interesting look at the what if. Like, what would have happened if Kenny and the Chimp actually had been greenlit as a series? So it definitely makes, or at least in my case, it makes me wonder how things could have turned out if we didn't end up getting Codename Kids Next Door as a series. But I do have to say I am glad we did get Codename Kids Next Door, although I still would be curious to see more of what Kenny and the Chimp would have been like. So I guess that's about it for now. This one was more of, I guess you could say this segment was more of providing viewers with a little insight on what Tom Warburton originally had in mind as a TV series before it eventually evolved into Codename Kids Next Door. So it's an interesting glimpse of the what if, essentially. That's, I guess you could say, was the thing I found the most intriguing about this particular segment. But otherwise, yeah. Oh yeah, one more detail. The crab claw with Professor XXXL, it does become a bit of a running gag throughout the TV series. Professor XXXL would take on different characteristics of different animals in his various appearances. So the crab claw was what kickstarted this running gag, essentially. So I just thought I'd mention that as a by the way, because when we see Professor XXXL again, he'll have a different animal characteristic than a crab claw. But otherwise, yeah, there we go. This was a pretty cool look at how things could have been compared to how they ended up being. And with that said, we've now discussed the B segment of episode 1 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel now. Take care, and until next time.